live and loud from the 2015 Toronto International Film Festival. And I am really pleased that we can welcome director Jay Roach, who's here with his movie, Trumbo. Austin Powers, Spy Who Shagged Me, Meet the Parents, Meet the Fockers, Trumbo.
Right.
Explain yourself.
A few others in between.
We'll get to those.
Game Change and Recount, because that's what it does seem to people I know, and I understand the skepticism when a comedy director takes on a dramatic topic, because, you know, these are serious. This particular story is very serious. But the great thing that, for me, set the tone for this story was that the man, Dalton Trumbo, was such a good communicator and such a driven, passionate guy that he knew when he was making some point, even if it was a really strident, zealous political point, to always throw in some smart-ass quip or a prankster's joke to make the message memorable and to make it somewhat entertaining. He was a showman as much as anything. So for me, the tone of our piece, though it has comedy, and though Louis C.K. plays one of the Hollywood 10, it came from the character. It came from his tendency to mix humor and very serious things. And the Hollywood 10 guys who spoke at his memorial turned it into a roast. And so it's like a coping strategy for that level of stress, and to not get comedy into such a serious topic would have actually been sort of not authentic. So that's been part of our thing from the beginning, part of the tone we were looking for.
Since you've started taking on more political fare, whether it's Recount, or whether it's Game Change, or whether it's The Brink, you've got a show on HBO called The Brink, which is high comedy dealing with, you know, nuclear disaster, and including Trumbo. They really are very funny. There's a lot of comedy in it, and you're saying that that's coming from the writers, the characters in Trumbo themselves, these really brilliant Hollywood screenwriters of the 40s and the 50s and 60s, but it's also coming from your own sensibility.
To some extent. I mean, I'm a little of a bifurcated person myself, and so I'm a little bit contradictory because I've always been interested in both. When I was in a pre-law student in college, I saw two films.
At Stanford?
At Stanford in economics. In pre-law, I saw Annie Hall and Eraserhead, and those two films convinced me to go to film school and drop out of any pre-law thing, and that's been a thing all along. It's just I'm interested in serious things and comedic things as well. Go ahead. You started off with a strong interest in politics and serious things, as you said. Yeah. So there was always going to be a drive to figure out some way to just get involved I got into comedy almost by accident through Mike Myers, but I knew I would get back to wanting to make films that raise questions about how shall we organize our civilization, where people don't like each other, don't get along, have selfish interests, and all have to somehow cohere into a functioning society. Those are really interesting questions to me, but I don't know how to ask them without sounding like a jerk, you know, unless I'm also simultaneously pointing out that there are so many absurdities in how these things go. So we're so feeble in a certain way at pulling it off that you have to be willing to make fun of it as well. And this is so serious. What Trumbo meant to me was he cared so much about justice that he was willing to sacrifice a very high quality of life. He was the highest paid screenwriter at the time. He was a great screenwriter, wrote mainstream films, and he was willing to throw it all away, go to jail, and sort of collaborate with his friends who were all going to go to jail over this principle of protecting free speech, basically. And that's serious. And they all suffered horribly. Many hundreds of guys. Some of them suffered way worse than Trumbo did because he was sort of set up and found a way to sell scripts on the black market. But
it's amazing that in November we learn in this film that Dalton Trumbo won 2 Academy Awards for Roman Holiday and
The Brave One.
The Brave One, while he was writing under a pseudonym.
And surreal for the family, who he didn't just write under one pseudonym. He had multiple pseudonyms and fronts, and they had different phones for every person. They had 5 phones, which was rare in those days, so that the kids would answer the phone, know which producer might be calling about which script was written by which, was it Sam Jackson or Robert Rich or you know, whatever other name he was using. So they were part of a little conspiracy, and they were sort of isolated by and ostracized. The kids at school would, you know, be mean to them. The mom would, Cleo Trumbo would be given the stink eye, you know, at a PTA meeting because she was seen as a wife of a communist. So they were stuck in a little secret house, you know, a house of secrecy, helping their father write black market scripts until he does win 2 Academy Awards and then writes Spartacus, one of my favorite films as a kid, and by getting his name on Spartacus with Kirk Douglas's help, helps completely shatter the Blacklist. There's a great scene at the end when Hedda Hopper, who's promoting the Blacklist, has to watch while John Kennedy says, I like this film and I think it's going to be a big hit. And you see her just almost crumble. I always compare it to throwing the water on the Wicked Witch and just watching her melt in a 15-second shot that we just travel around her face.
And all the casting in this movie, what a cast. Bryan Cranston is Dalton Trumbo, Louis C.K. as another one of the Hollywood...
a composite guy.
I'm going to get there. Helen Mirren.
Michael Stuhlbarg.
Michael Stuhlbarg is Edward G. Robinson. I mean...
Diane Lane, and Elle Fanning is the daughter, Nikki Trumbo. It's
so,
an amazing cast.
I got like, how much fun was shooting this movie?
It was, you know, it was fun. It was also, as I say, it was a great mix of fun and serious. Every one of those actors tried to reach someone who knew their character or you know, or had a direct link to the character for research, and would bring in very serious questions, very serious conversation about what mattered to this person. I love Michael Stuhlbarg's depth of research because he really cared about Edward G. Robinson did name names, but how did he get to that place? And it's a tragic story that he was very supportive of the left-wing causes, but because he could not hide behind pseudonyms, he had to have a choice of, you have to end your career forever or cooperate a little bit. At first it was cooperate a lot, then it was like, well, just cooperate a little bit. 4 times he showed up at HUAC and didn't cooperate. And then he finally named names and then crossed into another kind of
purgatory,
zone of ostracism, being ostracized because he wasn't forgiven quickly by anybody who had not named names. So it was a horrible Faustian bargain, and Stuhlbarg found all the nuance of that just by doing his own research.
It was beautiful. Bryan Cranston as Trumbo, who's absolutely brilliant, gives a fantastic speech when he accepts, towards the end of the film, a Writers Guild Award. Is that was his speech, or did you write that?
No, that's Trumbo's
words. It's beautiful.
That was all, you know, and I have to say, I didn't write hardly any of this. I did write that line that the announcer says, that's John F. Kennedy approving of Spartacus, written by a former communist, based on a former communist novel. That's the only thing I wrote. John McNamara, the great screenwriter who does a lot of television, wrote this screenplay about a great screenwriter and will never get credit enough because in our town, as we all know, screenwriters are treated as workers for hire, and in this case, 9 out of 10 of the Hollywood 10 were screenwriters. Who do you throw under the bus first? The screenwriters. And it's a horrible injustice, and I love that John McNamara has had the passion for many years. He got the option to the book. He wrote the script on spec, stuck with it for years. I came in and worked with him a little bit on it, and he finally got it made, and he's the guy that really deserves the lion's share of credit for how this got done.
And so why did this subject of First Amendment, freedom of expression, sort of the idea of a blacklist, which is so sinister and corrupt and corrupting, and it did corrupt Hollywood for a very long time. What about that interested you particularly now?
There's a pattern in history, and it's occurring, a chapter of it is happening right now, where an external threat is exploited to sort of cast a net that pulls in people that are just problematic but have only a little bit to do with the external threat, or maybe nothing. And fear is a useful propagandist tool, and as soon as you have a threat like totalitarian communism, or today terrorism, or immigrants that you believe are somehow the source of all evil, you can turn that into some kind of a campaign that whips up more fear and more guilt, a sense of persecution of associates, of people that might be somehow involved. So what happened to these guys, just because it was easy to say totalitarian communism is evil and is trying to destroy us, which was partly true, I mean largely true, but the untruth and the distortion came to be these screenwriters in mainstream Hollywood writing films like Roman Holiday are being puppeteered by Moscow to hypnotize Americans who are not aware that these films are convincing them to get behind the Communist Manifesto. I mean, that's the absurd twist, and that happens, you know, time after time. It's happening now. It'll keep happening, and the first thing that gets thrown out when it succeeds, and it often does, is that constitutional protections get tossed out. The right to privacy. We now have the right to spy on you. The right to squash people's speech. We think what you're saying is dangerous. You can't say it anymore, and we're going to get you fired or kick you out of your profession. That's so on the edge of happening, you know, moment to moment. So to tell a story about a guy who was willing to sacrifice everything to draw attention to that, that's what made it worth making to me.
We have a political campaign going on right now. We're going to have a presidential election, and we've got Donald Trump out there. We talk about the word absurdity. Donald Trump immediately comes to mind. And getting all his attention, gaining in the polls. What's your sense about what the political landscape is like and Donald Trump as a viable candidate right now?
It's hard to understand how. I mean, I worked on the Sarah Palin movie, so I see some relationships.
Right.
I love the movie Facing a Crowd. You know, if you, as a candidate, are willing to say anything, and you can come across as being honest, more honest than the other candidates, you can say really bold things, even if they're partly untrue, and get a lot of attention. And that in that sort of reality show environment that we're sadly all in now, it's no longer about telegenic. It's about you know, it's like World Wrestling Federation conflict. If you can get conflict that causes clicks or causes people to stay tuned, you can get the kind of ratings Trump got on the Fox debates. You know, Sarah Palin has been able to sort of surf that as well, and I'm sure I don't think it's a right-left thing. Any minute someone on the left will figure out, oh, we've got to get back to Abby Hoffman style and start doing pranks to get attention, and that's just I think right now is a symptom of a kind of, like, when did wisdom stop being a minimum basic requirement of candidacy? Is Donald Trump a wise man? He's an honest man, and he's an interesting man, but is he a wise man? Was Sarah Palin a wise person?
Don't you just have to be a rich man these days to run?
You may have to be, but I would love to find the next Abraham Lincoln, the next Thomas Jefferson, you know. If you're on the right, the next Ronald Reagan, if that's, you know, someone who's just at least, I don't know, a little more driven towards trying to improve the quality of life of people and solve problems and be focused on how to actually work stuff out. I'm doing the LBJ movie with Cranston now. Watching that,
wow.
Watching Johnson work his stuff in that first year, he got tougher once.
He was a master.
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
In that year, he did incredible things, passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 against all odds and sacrificing his support from the South. I mean, he actually was an incredible leader, and I take even just a little bit of that from some of the candidates who are up for 2016.
Are you scared that Trump could win the nomination?
I don't know. You know, I don't know enough. I'm not sort of tapped in enough to the sort of polling or the potential, but I'm always scared when the discourse becomes so superficial, when it's just, you know, don't just trust us, we'll take care of it, is like the last thing I trust.
Well, you know, the other thing that's so interesting, the flip side of the argument that you're making, because of course, in the entertainment industry, when it comes to Washington, the issue always has to do with guaranteeing the rights of creative people to express themselves freely, and also to protect that the integrity of that content as you make it, right, in the age of the internet. But what underlies the fear of the Hollywood 10 and why I think this story is so important and powerful is that Congress, HUAC wasn't wrong. Hollywood does set the narrative for so much of what becomes world culture. It's one of the reasons that I've now spent my time as a journalist covering it, because I believe in the power of storytelling and narrative features storytelling, such as screenwriters like Dalton Trumbo and others do it. So, you know, it's a balance. Like, people perceive the world through the lens of Hollywood more often than not. Do you disagree with that?
I wish I believed that a film could change the world that effectively. You know, I do believe that what a film can do is definitely influence and have an impact, big impact on the conversation. A film, I remember reading how much One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest changed the entire world of long-term mental health care. Like,
right.
It really had a huge impact. And I was like, yeah, I would hope so, but sometimes it wasn't even a good impact. There were so many institutions shut down, partly using the horrors portrayed in Cuckoo's Nest to justify that these were somehow, and some of them were inhumane, but some of them were humane, and sometimes a film or any kind of bit of culture can cause an overreaction. But I think it's very rare. You know, I wish I believed Recount, for example, convinced people that making it difficult to vote was a really bad idea. I wish I could believe that after seeing all the laws that have passed that make it more difficult to vote since then, you know,
right.
that somehow our film, which I thought was effective at capturing exactly, you know, the cautionary tale of the 2000 election. But it's tough to, when you see how little has changed and how it's actually gotten worse in terms of electoral politics, that voter ID laws, and early election, early voting is all getting, you know, just making it more and more difficult to vote. It's a little discouraging in terms of the influence you can have.
I would submit that it's not, you got the long term. Yeah. Films, televisions, the stories that you tell, they have incremental impact over time. You're not going to change mental institutions or the death penalty or having a black president or gay marriage or anything that you might think is an important value overnight. But over time, in terms of changing perception, and then things turn.
Again, maybe I think I do believe that you can bring it up with a film in a striking way across a large number of people, and I think these films do. And I hope Trumbo brings this up, this idea of how fragile the protections of civil rights can be. And that's a bipartisan issue. We showed it in Texas to a pretty conservative audience, and it played just as well as it played in Pasadena. And the feedback was, this is not a political story, it's an American story. As in, it's not political as in partisan. It's a story about fundamental principles in all democracies across the world, not just American, that unpopular speech, being allowed to say critical things, dissent, is American and democratic, and it's fragile. And they got that. They got the kind of David versus Goliath story of one guy, a few guys, a few powerful, brave people who were willing to take on the powerful structures and fight for that cause at great sacrifice, great cost to their own lives.
Thank you, Jay Roach. We could do this for another hour without a problem, and maybe we will at another time. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks so much, Jim. Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you.